for myself. Okay, so just keep safe and hope you can listen to our speaker for this afternoon. We have a we're so privileged to have our partner, Fujitsu. So Fujitsu is one of our PixPro NCR's technology partner. Okay, so we have from Fujitsu Amy Tabiliran, and of course our speaker who is actually currently in New Zealand, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, so it's very late already from his side. Okay, and our president is actually in Australia as well. Hi there.
Hello, mate. From Perth, Australia. With the kangaroos
So where
love.
are you now, President Jen?
I'm boarding in 15 minutes, but of course, we wouldn't want to miss this with Fujitsu Philippines and with Pix Pro for our KC. Magandang hapon po sa lahat ng ating manonood, our online community. Isang mapagpalang hapon po.
All right, all right. So thank you, President Jen. You know, that's the dedication. You know, our president is really dedicated for the learning of all our Capix Pro members, right? So yeah. So before I introduce to you our speaker for today, so again, I'd like to thank Fujitsu for hosting this afternoon's Kwentuhang Cybersecurity. Okay, so as mentioned, I have here Amy Tabiliran, who is the product head of Fujitsu Philippines. And a while ago, their marketing head is also in this Facebook Live, but later on, probably she'll be joining back. Okay, and of course, our speaker, Mark Trumbull. Did I pronounce that correctly, Mark? Trumbull.
You should. Yes, you did. Thank you.
All right, all right. So it's Mark Trumbull. Okay, so for this afternoon, okay, the title of our presentation is From the Perspective, okay, of so we're now going regional, okay? So that's how, you know, this Pix Pro Kwentuhang Cybersecurity is very diverse, right? So we're now going regional. So meaning, when we go regional, right, it doesn't mean that their issues or their concerns in terms of cybersecurity is not as serious as what we have here in the Philippines, okay? So Mark will be discussing that in terms of the cybersecurity trends and implications, okay, within the cybersecurity realm in ASEAN region, all right? So Mark has been, a cybersecurity professional for the past, I don't want to say how many years, okay, but I'll let Mark introduce himself, all right? So, but before that, before I give you to Mark, okay, so Francie, probably you can tell again our audience, our members here in the Facebook.
Yes, of course.
Okay, what will be our, what will be the flow of this Kwentuhang Cybersecurity?
Of course, VP Carms. So first of all, magandang hapon sa ating mga viewers sa online, sa Facebook. So we will just greet some of our viewers now. So we have Sir Seven hosting PH. He's currently watching now from Marriott Hotel. So hello, Sir Steven. Good afternoon. So good afternoon, Sir Walter. Al La Chica, of course, the usual viewers that we got, good afternoon sa inyong lahat. So the flow will be, of course, Mr. Mark Trumbull will present the topic today. And after that, we will have, I think we will be accommodating all of the questions coming from online, Facebook, and we are accepting also DM, direct message questions. And after that, we will have a Q&A. I think may paayuda si Ma'am Amy. Tama ba, Ma'am Amy? May paayuda ka rin?
Yes, may pa-Gcash tayo.
Yan ang gusto natin for the session.
Tamang-tama yan, Amy, kasi maulan ngayon. So I think
Oo
kailangan
nga.
ng pangkape ng mga viewers natin.
Correct. Meron tayo dyan. Nakaprepare ang Fujitsu for them.
Okay, all right. So we won't keep you waiting. Okay, so I'm sure you're all very excited and very eager to hear about the cybersecurity trends. Okay, in the region, and at the same time, for you to learn more from Mark. Okay, so Mark, maybe you can already do some introductions from your end.
For sure. So I'm just going to share my screen first, if I may. And I'll get you to confirm for me that you can see my screen also.
Yes, we can
Yes,
see
all
it.
good, but can you
Right.
do it on a presentation mode?
Presentation mode.
Yeah.
There you
That's
go.
working?
All good.
Great. Okay. So I've got about, 12 slides or 15 slides to talk to, and I'm going to talk to just a brief introduction to myself, but I'd like to also share some thoughts on, developing yourself in a cybersecurity career, because I recognize that we have many, many cybersecurity colleagues from the Philippines and across ASEAN on the call today. And I think it's important that in the context of our mission together and working as one community across APAC, it's important for us to sort of think about what does professional development in the current time of cybersecurity and all the challenges and opportunities that it carries. I thought I'd share a little bit about some of my professional development learnings, and I hope that will be of value to the audience. I will then talk to some recent trends. It's been a very unfortunately, a very exciting month in Australia, especially for some of the recent at-scale data breaches. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but more importantly, what we're really seeing behind the scenes there, and talk about that in the context of what it means for all of us working across ASEAN and ANZ in terms of what are the right things to be doing moving forwards, based on recent learnings, but also just the cybersecurity realm that we work in. And with your permission, I'd also like to share a little bit at the end of my presentation around what Fujitsu is doing, specifically as a service provider, but also specifically in terms of how we take our own approach to securing the organizations that we serve. So I hope that that agenda sits well with everybody, and with your permission, I'll continue. And just a short caveat that, all the views and perspectives, I will be sharing my opinions, but they are all based on my professional experiences and information that is actually publicly available, online and in the press. Just checking, everyone can still hear me?
Yes.
Yes, it's clear.
Great. Okay, thank you. Well, listen, first of all, just a little bit about myself. So Mark Trumbull, my current title is Head of Portfolio for Cybersecurity across APAC. I've been working at Fujitsu for almost 2 years now, and my primary role is to design the security services strategy, the services roadmap for offerings, and bring those offerings to market to deliver high value realization in the context of cybersecurity services for our clients. And we serve many clients across many industry verticals and maturity profiles, which I'll talk to shortly. But behind that, I've spent 30 years, or actually more than 30 years, working in the technology arena, which shows you that I'm a bit of an elder statesman in the industry. I don't mind saying that. But I have spent a good 25 years working in security roles. I've spent 20 of my years plus working at systems integrators and managed services providers, Fujitsu in more the recent times, but I also have worked at NTT, Dimension Data, and a number of other organizations. And I think those of you who work for similar organizations will appreciate that does give you quite a great network of organizational profiles to both work with as customers, but also as partnerships and across the communities. And it's an exciting place to work because you often get to work at the cutting edge or the leading edge of technology. You get to work with some of the top organizations across the globe, and you also get to an appreciation for the diversity of the customers and organizations that we serve in the public sector and private sector. During that time, I've also had the privilege of working with colleagues in other regions around the world in global organizations, as well as spending a lot of time working in the Australia and New Zealand region. And just for my colleagues in Asia, before I started working, I actually spent a good 10 years as a young child growing up in Singapore and Indonesia as well too. So I'm very familiar with the ASEAN region and spent a very important part of my early life living and going to school in ASEAN. If I look across my career path, you know, the last 25 years have been in cybersecurity specifically, but across that time, I've been fortunate enough to work in everything from, you know, engineering roles, working in technical support in global support centers, working as a security engineer you know, back in the days when we, a lot of network security was, you know, around firewalls and internet perimeter controls implementations. So I spent a lot of time doing a lot of engineering, security consulting, running risk assessments, doing security incident response, designing security strategies and architectures for banking, government, and a range of private sector organizations. And I was very fortunate through my work in primarily technical roles. I always had a strong focus on customer service and understanding the customer organization that I was working for or delivering solutions to, and trying to make sure that the technology solutions that we designed and deployed, we did that in the context of how the business that we were serving or the customer we were working with, how they needed to operate in their markets. I was very fortunate after a long stint working in technical delivery type roles. I was able to then take on leadership roles and management roles where I probably have spent the last 15 years building cybersecurity teams and practices and communities, often in very large organizations, and building and running those to deliver, you know, a wide range of client outcomes. And again, very, very fortunate to work at the leading edge of technology and, you know, working with some very, very extensive maturity profiles across the cybersecurity industry. I've also been very fortunate to work more broadly across technology solutions, be responsible for running teams of consultants, you know, sales specialists, bid management teams, technical engineering consulting teams. And so I've been very, very fortunate. I also spent a couple of years working to one of the banks on behalf of the organization I worked for in a client advocacy role. And I think that was very important. Often when we work in systems integrators and managed service providers, we spend a lot of time, you know, designing and deploying solutions to fix problems, but sometimes we miss the context of how the organization we're serving, you know, needs to operate in their markets and what their priority business agendas are and how the technology and services drive that. And I think in sort of summarizing, I'm very much an industry colleague. I'm very interested in building networks and working across the communities, invested in people in terms of understanding what other people are motivated for, how to help them drive and, you know, lead their careers, working very, very closely with clients and always working with partners, because when we work with partners, we can deliver great outcomes and value realization for our clients. And ultimately that serves to drive a better, more optimized and, you know, a higher value community of technology and cybersecurity professionals. I live in Melbourne. I speak to you tonight from Auckland, New Zealand. And when I'm not practicing cybersecurity or working in the technology business, I'm very interested in current affairs, community. I like to travel and I love to listen to music. But enough about me. Let's talk a little bit more about what I have learned on my career journey. You know, as I said, it's been an extensive career and time working in this industry. But one thing that I'm always very, very conscious of, I always try and remember what it was like when I was an engineer just starting out. You know, sitting in a room with other very, very senior and very smart cybersecurity experts and working with those people and understanding, you know, their knowledge, their experience, and taking that on board in terms of how I shaped my professional development. And I think if you look on the left-hand side of this screen, you'll see a number of bullet points. And I guess, you know, these are my tips and my, you know, the learnings that I've found through my career working in cybersecurity that I've found have done me in good stead as I've made decisions throughout my career in terms of what types of roles and opportunities I would like to take advantage of. And I think these are relevant to anyone working in the industry. For those of us who have been working in the industry for some time, a lot of this is very obvious. But for most importantly, for the people that are now coming in the younger generations that are coming into the cybersecurity industry, I offer you these recommendations and you know, for your sort of evaluation in terms of how you might use them to, you know, help drive your professional development. Because we all know that the cybersecurity skills industry has a significant gap. You know, we certainly do not have anywhere near as many cybersecurity experts and professionals working in the industry as we think we need today. And therefore, we need to do everything we can to inspire and encourage more of our colleagues across technology and services and other business domains to come into cybersecurity. So the things that have worked for me over the years is to always work on your network. And I think the PICS Pro NCR, the forum that we are on tonight is a really good example of creating a community, a forum that we can join, contribute, learn from, and hopefully at some point in time make significant contributions to. So I think building and nurturing a network, not just in cybersecurity, but more broadly in other communities, is really, really key. That allows you to communicate, to build stakeholder relationships that will do you in good stead later in life. I think participating in industry forums, whether it's seminars like we are running tonight, whether it's going to the Gartner IT Symposium, whether it's going to vendor technology conferences, these are all really important because it's there where you get to meet and connect with other industry professionals. It's where you get to learn and share and gain an appreciation of some of the tools, techniques, and technologies that are available to us. I spend a lot of time reading. I think, there is no shortage of information online that helps us stay informed and up to date with cybersecurity news, challenges, events. And I, for one, use LinkedIn quite a lot myself because I find that's a great way to fast track reading and accessing information that is prioritized by my fellow professionals in the industry. But you can also find great information from places like Security Magazine and Dark Reading and the like. I also like to read cybersecurity novels, good stories about cybersecurity technologies. And, I always find that if you can spend a little bit of time reading about cybersecurity, but in a different context to how we work, that always informs and gives us a little bit of diversity in terms of how we approach the opportunities and challenges we face. I always like to read books on leadership and biographies, because I think by watching how other people perform and develop themselves, we can take some of those lessons into our own life and our own career. I'm a big believer in achieving accreditations. Accreditations for cybersecurity are not a silver bullet, but they are a great way to quickly gain a lot of knowledge that will be common and relevant to our customers, our partners, and the colleagues we work with. And I, for one, are a big supporter of ISC Squared for CISSP and the like, ISACA for their CSA, their Certified Information Security Systems Auditor, and Certified Information Security Manager. These are accreditations that sometimes require years of experience, but they are a really good way to sort of shape your knowledge and put some structure and form in terms of how you go about your work. And of course, our technology partnerships provide a wealth of opportunity to learn, train, get hands-on tools, and gain accreditations that will help us in our career path. I think a really important thing to consider as you work on your professional development is actually to seek out mentors. Mentors can give you a great advance forward. It also helps the mentors in terms of driving their contribution to others' development. And I think we all have an obligation that as we progress our careers in this industry, we should also take on role as a mentor for others as well too. So I think mentorship and being a mentor or a mentee is very, very important. And again, for those of you that might be just starting out in your career or still at university or thinking about how to get into a career in cybersecurity, look for internships and graduate programs where you see a lot of opportunities for organizations that are willing to invest in the right attitude, the aptitude, interest and enthusiasm for technology and fixing problems. These organizations are very willing to invest. So look out for internships and graduate programs that will give you that first break into your cybersecurity career, and obviously take advantage of training and investment along those lines. And I think underpinning all of these learnings and recommendations are just taking on that curious attitude. It is by asking questions and promoting discussion that we learn more and we find ways to sort of resolve problems, leverage opportunities, and really perform at an optimal level. And that allows us to bring our best to the industry that an industry that really is growing up very quickly for both fortunate and unfortunate circumstances, but we really value diversity of experience. And if you look at the bubbles on the right hand side, often in your career you'll look at a fork in the road. Do I move down the path of a technical role? Do I want to work in a role where I can access great diversity of engagements and experiences as a consultant? Do I want to move into business management or business leadership where I can be a CEO of a company one day, for example? All of these career paths are possible working in the cybersecurity domain. And again, we can take on a technical focus or a risk management focus. And it's been very pleasing to see in recent years, many of the CISO roles were often filled by people with very technical backgrounds. But as we have seen across ASEAN and more so ANZ, I would suggest, CISO roles specifically have to be very, very business engaged, very business risk prioritized and bring their technical capabilities to bear to drive that, both in terms of how they engage with boards and report on compliance and security posture, but also in terms of how they motivate and lead technology and security team members. Anyway, I hope that provides some value in terms of just some things to think about in terms of how we all can really drive forward our career path in cybersecurity. So let's talk a little bit more about what's happened recently and what I think this means for us. I think we all appreciate that when we start to talk about cybersecurity, there are many branches and paths we can take with the conversation. We can take a very technical approach. We can look at cyber attacks. We can talk about threat intelligence. We can talk about advanced persistent threats. We can talk about threat actors that are working with, geocentric or nation-state motivations. We can talk about the rise of cyber crime syndicates in the last 2 to 3 years, an explosion of cyber criminal activity, taking advantage of or shifting their revenue streams from more traditional forms over to pandemic-related and pandemic circumstances. So we've seen a really significant shift in the last 3 or 4 years, and it creates a lot of conversations to talk about. But I think where I'll go with this today is maybe just talk a little bit more about recent events and what I think that means for us in the next 6, 12, and 24 months. I think underpinning all of this is that we all understand that cybersecurity attacks and data breaches, they are mainstream. They occur far more than we realize. It's only often when we see them reported, as has been done recently, that we realize how significant the impact of cybersecurity attacks and data breaches and the subsequent impacts they have on consumers, citizens, organizations, private and public sector, and whole economies are very, very significant. And unfortunately, I think that we are going to see more of the same down the track as we all embrace more of a digital, lifestyle at a personal and a professional and a societal level. And unfortunately, we are going to see, more unfortunate circumstances unfolding. But having said that, that only serves to inform how we can actually try and address the challenges better. And certainly we're going to see a lot of choices made, but we're also going to see a lot of choices made for us by government and others. And again, uncertain times, and we need to think about being adaptive and being able to respond and have context. I think just to underpin my next slide, I'll just talk about a key point. We do understand that the cybersecurity challenges are growing. The threat landscape is evolving. Cyber threat actors are very organized. They have access often to far more resources and intelligence, and they are far more motivated in terms of the attackers are far more motivated and resourced than the defenders, who actually are often constrained by budget, by skills, by the circumstances they operate in. So we've got a very significant expanding and evolving threat landscape, and certainly the types of attacks we're seeing in more recent times, the more advanced ones, really, they boggle the mind in terms of the ingenuity and the cleverness that is actually applied to some of these. We know that the attack surface is expanding at an accelerated level because of the digital footprint that we now see, having moved from on-premise to hybrid IT environments, complex at-scale ecosystems of hybrid IT encompassing cloud workloads, SaaS platforms, on-premise, physical data centers, logical data centers, supply chain responsibilities, a whole range of areas that actually really just make it harder to gain visibility of risk, to understand where our assets and our data resides and how well they are protected. And again, just making the comment that we know we have limited resources, which is a real challenge, but limited resources also forces us to be innovative and think outside the square, apply context and think about different ways to attack, old problems. And you will see also too that, that I've got a couple of headlines here. And I think the reason I wanted to sort of raise this is I won't talk to company names, but I'm sure in ASEAN, you've seen some of the news coming from Australia in the last 4 weeks. We've seen a telecommunications service provider breached very, very easily by just an unconfigured, unauthenticated and exposed API on the internet, which allowed a drive-by attacker or hacker gain access via the API to a database and exfiltrate millions of records of customers of this organization, both current customers, but customers who had actually ceased to be a customer. And there are two major sort of issues here. One is that the successful attack was predicated on probably a lack of governance and a lack of visibility and a lack of comprehension about APIs and the technology, footprints that they sort of expose, we still see today that there are a lot of weaknesses and a failure to secure applications. And this is a very good example of that. A very simple compromise, a very simple attack resulting in an at-scale, breach that has unfortunately had a massive impact on many, many Australians, and in some cases causing personal danger and health and safety issues. So that's very, very significant. Within 2 weeks, we saw a private health insurer, one of Australia's best known brands, also compromised. But this time, a more advanced persistent threat in terms of, stolen credentials being sold on the dark web, procured by another criminal, another threat actor group, who then use those credentials to access this organization's environment, to actually nest in the environment for a period of time, use lateral movement to gain visibility and understand what type of data and value was available to steal, and then actually deploy software and tools and automated scripts that allow them to very, very quickly exfiltrate a significant amount of data and customer and citizen information. It's probably going to go down in history as one of the most significant and unfortunate breaches we've seen ever in Australia, because it affects probably a good 30% of people who who have bought private health insurance in Australia. And again, this organisation, I know personally, has significant amount of security expertise, a significant amount of security technology and controls implemented. However, a very straightforward approach by the threat actors has actually allowed them to exfiltrate. And unfortunately, it appears that this organisation, and I stress the word, it appears this organisation only realised they had been compromised after the data had been exfiltrated from their environment. These two particular attacks are causing the Australian government to next week declare a whole lot of new rigorous regulation and legislative amendments to privacy and fines for data breaches, which I'll talk to in a moment. Another interesting breach that has just been shared in the last few days is a very large, well-known international multinational media conglomerate that had a database with, I believe it was around about 3 terabytes of information, including sensitive customer and corporate data. And it was simply a case of 3 servers, 2 of which were internet facing, were configured for open access. Fortunately, as I understand it, that breach effectively was found by an organization that was actually a cybersecurity services company, which actually sort of was looking for these types of problems and alerted them to it. You'll also be aware of the fact that one of the very large global cloud providers that we know well also had a recent breach, and that came back to, unfortunately, a weak configuration or misconfiguration of database and workloads sitting in the cloud as well too. So very, very significant breaches, but all pointing back to very common threat vectors and attack methods. And again, in many cases, organizations with significant cybersecurity technology and resources at their disposal still being compromised. And that comes back down to the threat actor motivations and the value of the data. And also, a few days ago, we also saw the Australian Institute of Company Directors, who are running a conference for Australian company board, board executives and directors to join a conference about cybersecurity. And a threat actor undertook a very well-planned attack to actually deny access to the conference and redirect users to fake and illegal payment links, suggesting that the users had to offer their credit card and provide a payment in order to get into the conference. So very, very well thought out, very crafty, very clever. But again, just a different type of cyber attack, but certainly one that was very, very concerning. And these are just 3 examples. What we've also seen as Australia, I think every day we have seen another news article about a breach in an organization of medium to large size, top 100 ASX. And what that tells you is that when the media get onto a good news story, they will go and look for more. We all know that ransomware attacks are happening daily and affecting many organizations, small to medium to enterprise. A lot of breaches are not being reported, but when these very significant breaches or attacks occur and are successful, it creates a lot of focus where many other organizations will be sort of reported on or, publicly sort of named for having been breached and having been attacked. And it's very important to understand that even if some of these organizations have been potentially irresponsible in terms of how they are holding and protecting data, they are actually victims of cyber attacks and threat actors, and it's in everyone's best interest to assist and help these organizations to recover, but also to take those learnings into the next term to actually ensure we can reduce the risk of these types of accidents occurring again. And I think the important thing here is that what we see is that, you know, where organizations are well secured and have good, strong defenses, threat actors won't spend a lot of time. They'll go down the road to find the next victim. And I think it's very important that we all appreciate that in ASEAN, we have some very good examples of organizations that are well protected, well defended, and well resourced. We have very good examples of some countries where we have strong regulatory and legislative requirements and you know, privacy sort of legislation that drives the right type of behavior, investment, and compliance. However, we know that is not whole scale across the ASEAN region for a range of, you know, reasons that are understood. So we need to think about what these learnings we can take from best practice or the benchmark, and then how we can apply those to you know, other industries, other maturity profiles, in particular, you know, countries within the region. So if I look at what next, we believe and we know quite well that there is going to be continued media reporting of major attacks and breaches, and that's going to create a lot of FUD. It's going to create a lack of trust by consumers and citizens of the organizations that they typically buy services from. So it's going to cause a lot of problems. And so you're going to see organizations move into recovery mode in terms of trying to restore consumer confidence and client confidence. But it also tells us that we're going to see government and other regulatory organizations and agencies imposing more rigorous rules and compliance. In Australia, in the last 2 to 3 years, we've seen significant additional regulations brought to the Security of Critical Infrastructure Act. That is a law that actually has expanded the definition of critical infrastructure organizations from 4 categories to now 11. So even food suppliers and retailers are now classed as critical infrastructure. If they suffer a cyber attack, that could affect the supply of food to the economy. And we've sort of seen some of the implications and consequences of that with the over the pandemic. But the point I'm making here is that the categories and the profiles of organizations classed as critical infrastructure have increased significantly in the last 12 months. And those organizations now need to demonstrate and report that they have a risk management program. They have to report on security incidents that affect their business within 12 hours. They have to report on security incidents that occur in their supply chain that may impact their business within 72 hours. This takes a lot of effort and resource and planning for these organizations to be able to meet these compliance and regulatory requirements. And what we are seeing next week, in the next month or so, is even greater rigor applied. We're also going to see more funding and power handed to the Office of the Privacy Commissioner so that they can actually investigate and penalize organizations for not demonstrating appropriate compliance and, you know, due care and responsibility for looking after data and you know, consumer data. And, you know, we're seeing some of these changes align closely to the GDPR. What's very topical there is that in Australia, up until recently, the maximum fine for misuse or not adequately protecting data and, you know, suffering a breach was $2 million Australian. They've now increased that penalty, maximum penalty, to 50 million. So that's 25 times you know, change or growth increase in the fines that can be applied to organizations who suffer a data breach and allow that to occur. So we're going to see many organizations reallocate budget or find new budget to improve and strengthen their cyber protection programs. That will happen across many industries and organizations, especially across medium-sized enterprise, and potentially those industries that potentially have not really prioritized cybersecurity before, and that's going to result in an increased spending on services and technology. It's also going to put more demand on cybersecurity specialists. Hopefully, we will see organizations investing in more graduate programs, more internships, more investments and partnerships with university and tertiary organizations to foster and encourage the next generation to take on a career in cybersecurity, so we can build the funnel for the years ahead. But we are going to see a demand on cybersecurity specialists, which will mean a war on talent. It will mean competitive rates. It will mean potentially a lot of churn with cybersecurity professionals moving across organizations in pursuit of higher salary packages. And that is an unfortunate circumstance, but it really reflects the need there. We're going to see organizations apply greater scrutiny and rigor on their supply chain and their business partnerships. So, there are two examples of that. One's where, where two organizations are doing business together through, e-commerce or electronic partnerships, or, using APIs, for example. You'll see organizations implementing technologies to be able to provide mutual attestation so that organizations can operate together with assurance that they are both well protected and meeting the right standards for cyber protection and defense. We will see more organizations, including Fujitsu, when we work with our customers, we will be asked to review contracts and sign up to obligations that ensure that we are providing the right level of security in the services and the supply chains that we use to provide those outcomes to our customers. And another thing we need to think about too is when we see a lot of media reporting of major attacks and breaches, there is sometimes an unfortunate outcome where we see complacency. If everybody's being attacked, well, that's okay. We're no different. I think we just need to be very careful with complacency, where we don't give up. We don't think that it's okay to not try and improve our security. And unfortunately, if we do see complacency, we will see government imposing more penalties and fines on organizations for not optimizing and investing in the cyber controls programs. So that's really just a summary of, I guess, some of the things that we see will happen across ANZ especially, but I believe we will start seeing that in certain countries across ASEAN. And I see that myself in some of the conversations I'm having with clients across Thailand and Singapore and Vietnam. So we come back to recommendations. What should we be thinking about as cybersecurity professionals, as cybersecurity leaders in the organizations and communities that we work in? Well, we all know that after many years, we still are not doing enough good work collectively to improve cybersecurity hygiene. We are not patching effectively enough. We don't always have a good comprehension of where our assets, where our data lies, what servers and infrastructure, cloud environments our data is living in, whether those platforms are being secured appropriately, whether they're being patched, whether we have programs in place to ensure we can patch very quickly when zero-day exploits or zero-day vulnerabilities are announced. It is pleasing to see stronger authentication mechanisms being imposed, where we are not very rarely being allowed to use simple passwords that do not have a policy to change. More organizations are, at worst, imposing stronger password authentication, introducing multi-factor authentication in some form to ensure that the ability to access environments is actually more verifiable and validated, so to really reduce the risk of compromised credentials or password guessing to allow access to environments. And I think also we need to understand our access paths. Where is our data? Where does it reside? What are the paths that our data transitions across? If we understand that, we can start to ensure that the baseline controls we have today are optimized to secure the data in transit, on-premise, secure our user access. It also allows us to understand where we have gaps in our architectures and our controls implementation, and look at how we're bringing those in and implement additional controls where we have residual risk, but again, take on the approach of continuous vigilance and continuous optimization. And again, this all comes back down to visibility. We need to understand, where do our assets live? It's information assets, it's data, it's consumer information, it's our people, it's the technology and the equipment that they're using to access services, it's where the services are being hosted in our data center, in the cloud, with another provider, with our SaaS partner. Do we understand the value of the data and the risk of that data being compromised or stolen or no longer being available? And that will help us determine what our risk appetite will be in order to invest and protect those assets. And again, that then turns into a plan for action. And I know that I'm stating the obvious here, but we know that sometimes the obvious is not well practiced in our industry. But some of the fundamental things, and this list by no means is not exhaustive. There are other ways and better ways to ensure an effective security plan. But we need to think about, how do we understand what good practice is, which benchmarks or frameworks or industry regulations should we align to? The NIST framework is, I'm seeing, well adopted across ASEAN. It certainly is well adopted across Australia. The Australian government have actually a set of guidelines called the Essential 8, which help address some of the cybersecurity hygiene concerns around applications and end users and operating systems. We're all familiar with the term zero trust, which really is a methodology and a mindset around restricting access, moving away from open access platforms to restricted access platforms where only validation and verification allows access to the resources that we need at the time that we need them. Zero trust can be implemented in many forms, but it is really a mindset about actually only allowing access when and where it is required, as opposed to trying to lock down open access platforms. I talked about optimizing and uplifting controls implementations, and we need to take particular care to scrutinize cloud workloads and hosting. Whether we do that from a technical testing point of view, whether we do that through attestation with our providers, both are very relevant. And we know when we look at the various attacks and successful data breaches that are occurring, many of them occur with misconfigurations or weak access controls around cloud workloads. Organizations need detection and response capabilities. They can be based around SOC and SIEM. They can be based around instant response services. They can be built in-house if you have the expertise and the budget. They can be built using trusted partnerships, such as those provided by Fujitsu and other organizations. And again, we need to work with the supply chain and business partners to improve mutual security controls, monitoring and reporting, and use the contractual obligations to do that. One of the learnings from the last 2 or 3 weeks here in Australia is that we also need to include media training for executives when we have an incident. So when we're responding to an incident and we actually have to make public declarations, media training for business executives and board members is really, really important, so they can be transparent, but also only provide the information that is relevant, and not set themselves up for more duress at the public coalface while they are trying to address and recover from incidents. And the last point I'll make in terms of recommendations, every client conversation I have had in the last 4 weeks, every client talks about security awareness training as being their number one priority. When I ask organizations, if you had more security budget, where would you spend it? 9 out of 10 say I would spend it on security awareness training. Security awareness training for my users, security awareness training for my developers, my coders, security awareness training for the managers of my networks and my servers and my cloud platforms, and extending that security awareness training to the friends and families and communities of the people that work for my organization. Because we know that people are our first line of defense, and people are often people are often a root cause or a trigger for successful cyber attacks and breaches, whether it be through phishing, whether it be through credential theft or social engineering. My last recommendation I'll share with you is there's a really nice paper that is actually posted by the Australian Cybersecurity Centre, which they've published in the last 2 weeks. And the paper is called Questions for Boards to Ask About Cybersecurity. And these are a good set of questions to ask ourselves as colleagues and practitioners working in the organizations we work with. Boards should be asking these questions, but we should also be asking these questions ourselves. Why are we concerned about cybersecurity? What is our organization's specific threat and risk environment? What's our risk profile? Which security frameworks are we using or should we be using? Do we patch our systems, and how often are we doing it fast enough? Are we patching all of our systems? Do we know where all of our systems are so we can patch them? Do we have the ability to prevent or detect cyber incidents? And if so, what are those controls? And are we reviewing them and checking them and making sure that they're aligned to the business risk profile that we have? Does our board understand and comply to our regulatory obligations? And are we funding and providing resource and effort to allow us to comply and report to that compliance? And the number one question, are we prepared to respond to a cyber incident? Have we practiced that? Have we tested it? Have we validated our assumptions? Do we know who in our organization is responsible to respond, to detect and respond and actually recover from a cybersecurity incident? And there'll be, a variation of roles and responsibilities there in terms of the people that do the work and the people that have the authority to direct the work. I hope those 2 sections have been of value, and I'll just check, Amy, are we running okay on time? Or do I need to hurry up? I'm okay
It's
quickly.
okay, Mark. Yeah, you can just wrap up if this
Great.
like you're just
I've got-
2 slides. Yeah.
Great, good. So listen, just to share with you, Fujitsu takes cybersecurity very seriously. We've been doing this for we've been serving IT services for over 50 years, and we've been working in cybersecurity services for 20 to 30 years. We are a leading IT services company. We are a digital transformation partner, and our UVANS, brand and our purpose aligns with the fact that we are very much an ESG-led organization. We value diversity and inclusion, and as well as focusing on cybersecurity services, we offer and deliver a range of other DX services where we always strive to include integrated services. And if there's one thing I'll ask you to remember is our purpose at Fujitsu is to make the world more sustainable by building trust in society through innovation, making the world more sustainable by building trust in society through innovation. We serve all manner of organizations, both public and private sector, top 100, and a range of enterprises across many maturity profiles and industry sizes, including defense and highly protected, and right across the commercial sector. Our value proposition is that we deliver security integrated, security built in, security assured, delivered by a platform and capability that is specialist capability for cyber, but we deliver it as an integrated services outcome to help our organizations that we've served deliver on, the themes and key focus areas of trusted society. Because security is the key to build trust in a truly connected society. And the only way we achieve that is by securing our digital enterprise. And every organization today is a digital enterprise of some form or another. Okay, just quickly to wrap up, we deliver a range of cybersecurity services that help our clients get the cybersecurity hygiene right, but also ensure that they have those advanced security services that actually allow them to detect and respond to incidents before they occur, or in the event that a security incident does occur, we can mitigate and contain the impact that it has on the business operating. And that includes services that we call managed detect response, effectively SOC monitoring services, vulnerability management services to identify and prioritize and resolve cyber risk exposures through misconfigurations, identity risks, and vulnerabilities and zero-day exploit sort of exposures. We provide consulting services both through our managed services, but also as pure plays doing technical validation, controls validation, and delivering strategy and architecture advice. We provide security services around protecting our organizations we serve through email threats and cyber attacks, as well as actually including cybersecurity security awareness training into those services as well too. And we're able to provide a range of other cybersecurity services integrated to broader services across workspace, user experience, cloud, and applications. And we have a range of other products and solutions that allow us to achieve that, whether it be securing and using ServiceNow to deliver that, or whether it be around just securing Office applications and macros. And on that note, I'll thank you very much for allowing me the time to present and talk to you today, and I'll be very happy to open up to questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mark. That was very, your topic is very relevant right nowadays, and I think it's really how we create awareness in the society. Okay, and I think it's very alarming because of all the threats that are happening around the world, right? The attacks are really targeted now to consumers, right? And I like what you've said, okay, that, we really need to have that cybersecurity awareness across the organization, in any form of, in all, in every one of us. Okay, so we really need to be very vigilant right now in terms of cybersecurity, and communication is very key. So what you've said about, involving media, it's because, everyone needs to be aware and what would be the implication of being attacked, right? Okay, so we'll go to the question and answer we go to the questions from our Facebook live viewers. Okay, Francie, do we have some questions there?
Yes, BP Carms, we actually got some questions from the viewers online. So the first question is, okay, I'll go with the first question, Ma'am Carm. So Mark, here's the first question. What will be the impacts for the governments introducing more strict regulations into industries and business to address cybersecurity challenges? And will this be effective? So that was the number one question that we got.
Yeah. Thank you, Francie, and thank you to the audience for the question. It's very topical. I did talk through some of that earlier, but I think that, for organizations across the globe, the financial penalties for enduring and suffering a data breach are going to become significantly higher. So there's going to be a balance of the value for organizations to defend themselves more effectively versus paying a fine, but those fines and fiscal penalties are going to increase. But at the same time, threat actors are going to continue to focus very, very quickly and accelerate that focus in order to generate their revenues from successfully breaching organizations. So those fines, I think large multinational organizations can probably afford it if they have to, or they can't move fast enough. But I think we're going to see a significant impact on medium-sized organizations that have not traditionally put money aside to invest in cybersecurity, or have actually allocated revenues or funding to be able to pay fines when these become imposed, or more importantly, pay ransomware, bribes as well too. So I think it's a significant fiscal impact on many organizations, both in complying and paying fines, but also in terms of the acceleration of attacks from cyber attackers. Threat actors will attack faster and more frequently and wider if they believe that it's going to be harder to attack those larger organizations down the track.
Okay, so I hope that answers the question that we got from our online. So, Ma'am Carms, I'll proceed to the second question. What advice should we provide the organizations that we are working to help them improve the protection of their information assets?
Yeah, good question. I think, Carmela, you said this before. The first thing we must do as practitioners, as part of our communities, we need to communicate. The more we communicate and the more we communicate strategically using many of the assets and information that are available to us, that's the first step. Start the conversation, promote the conversation, lift the conversation, revisit the conversation, because this is a continuous improvement process. And I think it comes back down to getting the cybersecurity hygiene right. And I'll list out some recommendations on how to do that. Patching, ability to patch, understand your assets, where are your assets located, what is the value of the data. In some cases, should you be actually holding on to that data? If not, then, remove it. And, get the hygiene right, understand your assets, get visibility, and implement manage, detect, and response type services, whether you do that internally, externally. If you get that right, that'll give you a clear baseline to work from to understand then what are your additional risk exposures and what are the other gaps we need to address.
Okay, so I think we answered your question for the question number 2. And the last question that we got, Mark, what is the right balance of technology, process, and people to resolve cybersecurity issues?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think if you're a large enterprise organization that has significant asset and data values, like a bank, you're going to probably invest in some of the best technology, automation, so automated threat detection and response, and you will have a significant capability and expertise at your disposal. Smaller organizations or medium-sized organizations probably need to rely on working with partnerships and, economical but effective security technologies. So I think the balance needs to adjust based on your risk profile, the potential value impact of a successful cyber attack or a data breach, and then there's a balance of actually how much do you insource, how much do you invest in your own team and your own capabilities, or what's the right balance of partnerships or services. And as I said earlier, I think that mature organizations are going to ask their partners and service providers to do more and to provide attestation to do so. And the last point I'll make too is that we live in a time where the software as a service partnerships delivered by some of the cybersecurity technologies make this a lot easier and more accessible for medium-sized organizations. There are some great security technologies now that are available that can be switched on very quickly, hosted in the cloud by appropriate cybersecurity vendors, and are very economical to consume.
So thank you so much, Sir Mark, on the question. So I hope we answer all of the questions that we got from online. So BP Carms,
I think
all the questions.
before we go to the game, right? So I think Amy also prepared some vouchers for the viewers. Okay, so our weekly ayuda to our kwentuhang cybersecurity viewers. All right, but I'd like to. I think there's a very good comment here coming from Miss Katrina Atienza. Okay, so I'll just read what she mentioned here, right? So I love how inclusive the awareness training that you mentioned, not just internal, but also to customers, partners, and community, which I agree. I love, I like, the diversity. I love the inclusiveness, right? And there's also another question, right? Coming from, actually, there's a follow-up question from Katrina, okay? So you mentioned the public communications training for cybersecurity executives so that during an incident of breach, the information shared to the public is transparent, at the same time not sharing too much. So why do some companies decide to stay quiet during a breach, and what is the impact of that?
It's a very good question.
I
Very
know,
good
right?
question.
I
Yeah.
like this question as well. That's why
Yeah.
I picked it.
Look, it is subjective, and again, I'll say first that this is my opinion based on my experience and my conversations with colleagues in organisations. But we've just seen two good examples, right? One of the major breaches in Australia, the CEO was very, very transparent and probably too quick to share too much information, and what that resulted in was, when you provide too much information, people start asking more questions about the detail, and then you can't produce the detail, and then it actually can potentially not look good. So I think we saw a situation where a CEO was probably, given too much information, was trying too hard to be open, and that resulted in a lot of questions that she could not answer. And the viewers and the people who are watching see you for what you do not achieve as opposed to what you achieve. The other significant event in Australia, that organisation was very quiet. They didn't, we've detected a breach, but we don't think there's a problem. 3 days later, actually, a lot of records have been released. A couple of days later, we think this has actually had a significant impact. So that organisation, by not saying too much, is potentially, and I stress this, potentially is being seen as less trustful. So it's a balance to be found. And I think this is where the value of getting in experts to help your board and executives to be trained in public relations for significant cybersecurity incidents. For all of us, we understand these environments to some degree, how to explain them. But for board executives and people who are focused on business, they don't always have the same comprehension and therefore might not be able to explain technology details as well. Or they may choose to say nothing because they're actually not confident. Either way, too much, too little, it can actually get you undone. So that's why we need to sort of take a bit of an even approach to it. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, so that's a very very good answer, Mark. Yeah, so I think we'll go to the last question, okay? Because your topic is very, very interesting, and it's very, it's very timely. That's why some of our viewers are really very eager to ask questions. Okay, so there's another question from our FB viewer. So VP Lon, would you like to read that question?
Yeah, sure, Carmela. Thank you. Mark, there's a last question on the online with what is some practical cybersecurity advice you could give to the people at home in the age of social media and the Internet of Things?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Marlon, and thank you for the person who asked that question. Yes. Again, we often spend time talking about protecting organizations, and we need to think about the consumers. And you heard me mention before that I'm seeing many organizations, as they roll out security awareness training to their users and their employees, they are offering and extending that security awareness training to their families and communities also. And I think that's a very important thing that we need to do. And I think if you were going to just give 2 or 3 pieces of advice, and again, this is not conclusive, it's about not clicking on links. If you're getting an email from someone that you don't know, offering you something you weren't expecting, or even trying to scare you into doing something you didn't know about, don't click, don't respond. If it's important or it's true or it's accurate, they will call again, or they'll ring you, or they'll find you another way. So I think the first step for most people in the community is just do not respond unless you're sure of who and what and why you're being contacted. And it's very, very important. I think the second thing is we should always try and, with the service providers we're working with, our water utilities, our electricity utilities, our government services, embrace multi-factor authentication or two-factor authentication. So there's less likelihood that our credentials will be compromised for services that we rely on. And I think that maybe the third bit of advice I'll give is, if you can't use strong authentication, always have strong passwords. Use different passwords for different services and store and secure those passwords in a place where they cannot be sort of accessed. There are many more things we could suggest, I think, Marlon and team, but I think those are 2 or 3 basics that just give us a little bit of protection, a bit more protection against the typical methods and actions that threat actors are trying to undertake.
All right. Thanks for that one, Mark.
Yeah, okay. So actually we're just left with like less than 5 minutes. Okay, so we'll do the Q&A now for the GCash winner. Okay, so Amy, can you do the honors in like giving the questions to our audience? And then Francie
Alright.
can look into, who would be the winner for that particular question.
Okay, so Fujitsu will be giving out 3 vouchers, GCash vouchers today. So for our first question, what is the
But
Fujitsu
hindi Maya.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry about that.
Next time, we need to be
Next time, yes.
next time we need to
Ah.
include also Maya.
Okay. Actually, we could offer different types naman. Okay.
I know.
Yes. So for our first question, so what is the Fujitsu purpose described in the presentation by Mark Trumbull today? Actually, that is our rebranded purpose. That is our vision. We got a lot of audience right now. I hope you were able to pick it up. It's after the slide in which Mark described the key offerings of Fujitsu and who is Fujitsu.
Yeah. And you remember, Amy, that I repeated it twice just to make sure. Any
Anyone
answers?
from the viewers, Francie?
We got nothing as of now.
Oh.
Farms. Yeah, I think
Ah,
they're
we
still
have
typing.
one. We have
Oh,
one
there,
from
there.
LJ Rufon. Yan. Tama si Sir LJ. Yan. Make the world more sustainable by building trust in society through innovation. Thank you for that.
Well done.
Yes, thank you.
Very good.
Okay, so we move on to our next question. Name 3 or more of the Fujitsu cybersecurity services that Mark had described today. It's actually on the last slide that he used. I'm giving out clues.
Bigay ka pa daw ng maraming clues para
Oo.
is na.
Yun na yung huli. O kahit 2 to 3, yan. O. Ano ba yung mga offerings of Fujitsu in terms of cybersecurity? Yan. So they're just typing pa, I think.
Yes.
I think it's very common naman eh.
Si Daryl daw ang sasagot. Daryl, hi Daryl. Pwede ba daw taga Fujitsu sumagot niyan?
Oo. Pag kay Fujitsu daw, wave.
Sila pa daw magbibigay ng additional 500.
Ayan. Ayan, so audience. Marami. Pero there's several things that Mark had discussed. And it's very much common to cybersecurity vendors. Anyone? Going once?
Should we just take one answer? If we get one right?
Yes, one answer.
Yeah.
One answer would do. Three-letter word could do. Anything that start with manage can be an answer.
Yes, that's right.
Yes.
So
Come on,
it is
guys.
now giving the answer.
Yes. You just have to fill out the 2 words.
Oh, there's an answer from Sir Emil. Is that correct?
I think we have Sir Harold, Managed Security Services.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah,
there's also,
that's correct.
actually before that, there was an answer from Sir Emil, delivering a transformation portfolio for a sustainable world.
Mark, is this something that we could do?
Yeah.
If you've got enough prizes, I think you should award prizes for,
So we'll
for
have,
the answers. Yeah.
okay, since we don't
We can
have,
see that.
so good thing we don't have enough time. So we'll
Mm.
give the, we'll give the correct answers to both Emil and
And
Sir
Well done.
Harold.
Well done.
Harold. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Si Daryl, humabol pa siya. Sorry, Daryl.
Wave
ikaw
na yan kay
daw
Daryl.
ng additional 1,000 Gcash.
Ah,
Yeah, okay. So I think we've reached the top of the hour for our Kwentuhang Cybersecurity. Okay, so it's going to be a rainy weekend. Okay, it's a long weekend here in the Philippines, but it's going to be a rainy weekend. So hope everyone will stay safe at home and charge na tayo ng mga phone and
Long
gadget.
weekend for us, but it's raining, right?
Yes. And stay safe, okay? And we'll do our Amy, alam mo ba yung sinasabi natin every end of the Kwentuhang Cybersecurity? Ha?
Ako,
Gusto mo ikaw na lang ang magsabi.
Hindi ata ako umaabot.
Kasi hindi
dyan,
kami lagi
girl.
nagsasabay-sabay eh.
Oo. Delay sa internet.
Delay. Okay, yeah. So by the way, thank you, Mark, for accommodating us. I know it's late there already, and you're in Australia, right? So I know it's
New
late.
Zealand.
New Zealand. Okay,
It's
so
already 10 o'clock.
very
on your
late.
side.
Yeah, it's
Yes.
very late over there. Okay. So, but we'll end this and we'll give our ending credits to all of you, mga Kwentuhang Cybersecurity. Until next week, okay? And then do watch the other partners that will be doing the Kwentuhang Cybersecurity. That's every second and last week of every month. But of course, we do have the other cybersecurity, which is hosted by our national
chapter.
chapters. Okay? So, Frenzy, ikaw na? Ako na.
Ikaw na, VP Carbs ba?
Ayoko, baka mapahiya ako. By the way, belated happy birthday to our
Yes,
chairman.
Yes, belated, Sir Angel.
Belated
Mr.
happy
Chair.
birthday. So, I'll do this well, para naman hindi tayo mapahiya, okay? So, we'll end this by saying our famous line, okay? Sa cybersecurity, walang weekend, happy lang. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you,
everyone.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Everyone, keep safe.
Bye.